My name is Eva, and I am 57 years old. For 12 long years, I lived in complete silence, not by choice, but because my ears had failed me. Then a miracle happened. Surgery gave me back my hearing. But instead of telling my son the wonderful news, I made a strange decision. I kept it a secret. Why would a mother hide such joy from her own child? Because what I heard when they thought I could not hear changed everything I believed about my own son. Before I tell you what my ears discovered, after 12 years of silence, let me know where you are joining me from today. Please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe. What you are about to hear is something I never imagined I would share with anyone. But I think you need to hear this story. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, in a modest home filled with music. My mother played the piano every evening after dinner, and my father would hum along while reading his newspaper. Music was not just entertainment in our household. It was the language we spoke when words were not enough. So it surprised no one when I decided to become a music teacher. For 25 years, I taught at Jefferson High School, guiding young minds through the beauty of melody and rhythm. Piano was my specialty, but I also taught violin and vocal techniques. My students called me Mrs. H, short for my married name, and many of them kept in touch long after graduation. My husband Harold was a civil engineer. We met at a church picnic when I was 23, and he proposed under a magnolia tree exactly 1 year later. Harold was not a musical man. He could not carry a tune to save his life, and his attempts at dancing were comically awkward. But he loved listening to me play. Every evening he would sit in his armchair with a cup of coffee, eyes closed, as I filled our home with Chopin and Beethoven, and sometimes silly songs I made up on the spot. He said my music was the soundtrack of his happiness. We had one child, a son named Derek. From the moment he was born, I knew he had inherited my love for music. As a toddler, he would bang on pots and pans, creating his own little symphonies. By age 5, he was sitting beside me on the piano bench, his tiny fingers trying to mimic mine. I taught him everything I knew, and he absorbed it like a sponge. Those afternoons with Derek at the piano remain some of the most precious memories of my life. Just the two of us, mother and son, speaking through music. Harold passed away in a car accident when Derek was 15 years old. A drunk driver ran a red light and collided with Harold's truck on his way home from work. The police officer who came to our door that night spoke words I could not comprehend. My husband, my partner of 18 years, was gone in an instant. The grief that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out a vital organ. For weeks I could not eat, could not sleep, could not play a single note on the piano. But I had Derek, and Derek needed his mother. So I pulled myself together, piece by broken piece, and focused on raising my son. I took on extra tutoring jobs to make ends meet. Some months I worked 60 hours a week between the school and private lessons. Every penny I earned went toward Derek's future. His education, his clothes, his needs. I wore the same dresses for years, but my son always had new books and proper shoes. That was what mothers did. At least that was what I believed. Derek thrived despite losing his father. He graduated high school with honors and earned a scholarship to study finance at Emory University in Atlanta. I was so proud I cried for 3 days straight. My boy, my little piano player, was going to make something of himself. He worked hard through college, landed internships at prestigious firms, and eventually secured a position at a major bank in Atlanta. By 28, he was a successful financial analyst with a corner office and a salary I could barely comprehend. Then he met Brenda. She came from old money, the kind of family that had summer homes and trust funds. Brenda was beautiful in that polished magazine cover, way with perfect blonde hair and designer clothes. When Derek introduced us, she smiled at me with teeth so white, they almost glowed. She was polite, saying all the right things about how lovely my home was, how talented Derek had told her I was. But something in her eyes felt distant, like she was looking through me rather than at me. I dismissed my unease as a mother's natural protectiveness. Derek loved her, and that was what mattered. They married in a lavish ceremony at a country club in Atlanta. I sat in the front row, in a dress I had bought on clearance, surrounded by Brenda's relatives in their designer gowns. During the reception, Brenda's mother made a comment about how nice it was that Derek's family could attend. Singular, family, as if I were the only one left, which I suppose I was. I smiled and sipped my champagne and told myself I was being too sensitive. The first few years of their marriage coincided with the most devastating period of my life. It started with small things, a ringing in my ears that would not go away, difficulty hearing conversations in crowded rooms. I assumed it was just age, just stress, just one of those things that happen when you push past 40. But the symptoms worsened rapidly. Within 6 months, I was struggling to hear my own students play. Within a year, I could barely follow a conversation without reading lips. The diagnosis came like a death sentence. Otosclerosis. The doctor explained a condition where abnormal bone growth in the middle ear prevents the tiny bones from vibrating properly. In some cases, surgery could help. In my case, the disease had progressed too far too fast. The surgeries available at that time had low success rates for advanced cases like mine. I tried anyway. 2 operations, thousands of dollars. Months of recovery. Neither worked. By age 45, I was completely deaf. The world of sound that had defined my entire existence simply vanished. No more music, no more birdsong, no more laughter or whispered conversations or the gentle hum of life happening around me. Just silence. Absolute suffocating silence. I had to retire from teaching. How could I instruct students in music when I could not hear a single note? I received a modest pension and disability benefits, enough to survive, but not enough to feel like living. I learned sign language through community classes and online tutorials. I became skilled at reading lips, though it was exhausting and imperfect. I adapted to a life I never wanted, a life without the one thing that had always given me purpose. Derek was newly married when I lost my hearing completely. He promised to learn sign language so we could still communicate, and to his credit, he did. Those first few years, he was dedicated. He practiced his signing, sent me video messages, called using relay services. He even convinced me to move to Atlanta so I could be closer to him and his growing family. Derek bought me a small apartment about 15 minutes from his house. 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, a view of a parking lot. It was nothing like my cozy Nashville home with its music room and garden. But Derek said it was practical, said I needed to be near family. I agreed because I trusted my son. I sold my piano before moving, because what was the point of keeping it? I could not hear it anymore. That was perhaps the hardest goodbye of all. The early years in Atlanta gave me hope. Derek visited every Sunday, sometimes with Brenda, sometimes alone. We would sit together in my small living room, signing back and forth about our weeks, our memories, our hopes. Brenda never learned sign language. She said she tried, but found it too difficult. During visits, she would smile and nod at me, then drift to the corner to scroll through her phone. I told myself she was just busy. She had a demanding social calendar, charity events and luncheons, and whatever else wealthy young wives did. It was not personal. Derek and Brenda had 2 children. First came Madison, a delicate girl with Brenda's blonde hair and Derek's brown eyes. 2 years later, Tyler arrived, a rambunctious boy who never seemed to stop moving. I loved those children from the moment I saw them, but loving them from a distance felt like reaching through glass. I could not hear their first words, their giggles, their cries. I could not sing them lullabies or teach them piano the way I had taught their father. When I tried to communicate with them, they stared at my hands, making strange shapes, and quickly lost interest. Madison and Tyler did not learn sign language. Brenda said they were too young, that there was no point confusing them with another language. Derek did not argue. When they visited my apartment, the children would say a quick hello, then disappear into the guest bedroom to play on their tablets. I sat in the living room with Derek, who increasingly seemed distracted, checking his watch, glancing at his phone. Our conversations grew shorter, more superficial. I asked about his work. He gave brief answers. I asked about the children. He said they were fine. Fine. Everything was always just fine. By the 6th year in Atlanta, the visits became monthly instead of weekly. Derek said his job was demanding, that he had been promoted and now worked longer hours. I understood. I had worked hard too once, but the distance between us felt like more than just schedules. When he did visit, there was a weariness in his eyes that I could not quite place. He sighed a lot. He looked at me sometimes with an expression I could not read. Pity, frustration, guilt, I was never sure. Brenda accompanied him less and less. When she did come, her impatience was barely concealed. She would sit on my old couch with her arms crossed, her foot tapping an irritated rhythm on the floor. I could not hear the tapping, but I could see it. Every few minutes she would look at Derek with raised eyebrows, silently asking when they could leave. The visits that used to last 3 or 4 hours now ended after 90 minutes, sometimes less. I noticed other things too, small things that built into a pattern I did not want to see. When I arrived at their house for holidays, Brenda would greet me with a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. She spoke to Derek in quick, hushed tones when they thought I was not looking. Of course, I was always looking. When you cannot hear, you learn to watch. You notice the glances people exchange, the way mouths tighten, the subtle shifts in body language that hearing people miss because they are too busy listening. One Thanksgiving, I arrived early to help with the cooking. Brenda had not expected me until later. When I walked into the kitchen, she was on the phone, her back to me. I could not hear her words, but I saw her reflection in the window over the sink. Her face was twisted with annoyance, her free hand gesturing sharply. Then she turned and saw me. Her expression transformed instantly into that plastic smile. She waved me to sit down, mouthing sorry, as she ended her call. For the rest of the day, she treated me with exaggerated kindness that felt more insulting than any honest coldness. I began to dread those family gatherings. Not because I did not love my grandchildren or want to see my son, but because I felt like an outsider in their world. The dinner table conversations flowed around me, lips moving too fast for me to follow, laughter erupting at jokes I could not catch. Derek would occasionally turn to me and sign a simplified summary. "Mom, we are talking about Tyler's soccer game. Mom, they are discussing their vacation plans." The summaries were brief, the details missing. I smiled and nodded and pretended I did not feel invisible. My apartment became my refuge and my prison. I filled the silence with books, hundreds of them, stacked on every surface. I learned to knit, producing scarves and blankets nobody needed. I tended a small container garden on my balcony, nurturing tomatoes and herbs that thrived better than I did. Some days I attended meetings at the local deaf community center, where I had made a few friends who understood my world. Margaret, a retired accountant who had been deaf since childhood. Robert, a widower who lost his hearing to illness like me. We signed together about our lives, our frustrations, our small victories. It helped. But it was not family. I told myself that Derek loved me. He still transferred money to my account every month, more than I needed, even though I never asked. That was proof, was it not? He cared about my well-being. He was just busy, just overwhelmed with work and children and all the demands of modern life. Sons grew up and built their own lives. That was natural. That was healthy. I should be grateful he kept in touch at all. But late at night, alone in my silent apartment, I wondered, did he send money because he loved me? Or because it was easier than actually spending time with me? Was I a mother to him? Or just an obligation to be managed? I never asked those questions out loud. Some truths are too frightening to pursue. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was watering my tomato plants when my special doorbell flasher went off, indicating an incoming video call on my tablet. It was Dr. Patterson, my ear specialist, using a sign language interpreter. She wanted to discuss a new treatment option. I almost declined the call. After 12 years and multiple failed surgeries, I had accepted my deafness as permanent. Hope was a luxury I could no longer afford. But something made me answer. Call it curiosity, or perhaps the universe nudging me toward a different path. Dr. Patterson explained that cochlear implant technology had advanced dramatically since my last surgery. The newest generation devices showed remarkable success rates even for cases like mine. She had reviewed my file and believed I was a strong candidate. There were no guarantees, she cautioned, but the odds were better than they had ever been. She recommended I come in for comprehensive testing. I sat in my apartment for 3 hours after that call, staring at nothing. Could this be real? After accepting silence, as my forever companion, was I actually being offered a chance to hear again? The thought terrified me as much as it thrilled me. What if it failed again? What if I got my hopes up only to have them crushed? I was 57 years old. Maybe I was too old for miracles. But another thought crept in, one I tried to push away. What if it worked? What if I could hear again? What would I discover about my life, about my son, about all the things said around me, when they thought I could not hear? I scheduled the evaluation without telling Derek. Part of me wanted to protect him from potential disappointment. He had enough stress in his life without worrying about his mother's medical procedures. But if I'm being honest, there was another reason. I was not sure how he would react. Would he be happy for me, or would he see it as inconvenient, another disruption to his carefully ordered life? The testing took several weeks. Hearing assessments, imaging scans, consultations with surgeons and audiologists. Each appointment confirmed what Dr. Patterson suspected. I was an excellent candidate for the new cochlear implant. The surgery was scheduled for a Thursday in October, exactly 12 years and 4 months after I had last heard any sound. I told no one. Margaret from my deaf group thought I was visiting a cousin in Florida. Derek received a text message that I would be unavailable for our monthly call due to a routine medical checkup. The lies came easily, which disturbed me. But I could not bring myself to share the truth. This felt like something I needed to do alone. The morning of the surgery, I took a taxi to the hospital. A kind nurse named Patricia helped me check in, communicating through written notes and gestures. She squeezed my hand before they wheeled me into the operating room. I remember looking up at the bright lights, the masked faces, the silent machinery. Then everything went dark. I woke up in recovery with my head bandaged and a dull ache throbbing through my skull. A doctor appeared and signed slowly. Surgery went well. Rest now. The real test would come in 2 weeks when they activated the implant. Those 14 days were the longest of my life. I returned to my apartment, moving carefully, following post-surgical instructions with religious dedication. The waiting was unbearable. Every morning I woke up wondering if this was the day my world would change. Every night I went to sleep afraid that it would not. The activation appointment arrived on a grey November morning. I sat in a small room at the audiology clinic, sensors attached to my head, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The audiologist, a young woman named Dr. Kim, smiled reassuringly as she adjusted her equipment. She would start with low frequencies, she explained through an interpreter, then gradually increase. I should tell her when I perceived any sound. She pressed a button, and the universe exploded. It was not beautiful at first. The sounds were distorted, electronic, like listening through a broken radio. But they were sounds. Actual sounds reaching my brain for the first time in 12 years. I heard the hum of the machines. I heard Dr. Kim's voice asking if I was okay. I heard my own sob as tears poured down my face. The audiologist explained that my brain would need time to readjust. Sounds would seem strange initially because my auditory cortex had forgotten how to process them. Over the coming weeks and months, as I practiced listening and the device was fine-tuned, things would become clearer, more natural. She handed me a packet of rehabilitation exercises and scheduled follow-up appointments. I walked out of that clinic into a world transformed. Car engines roared impossibly loud. Footsteps clicked on pavement. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. A child laughed. Wind rustled through trees. I stood on the sidewalk, overwhelmed, crying in public without any shame. I was 57 years old, and I was hearing the world again. That first week was a symphony of rediscovery. I listened to everything: water running from my faucet, the refrigerator humming, my own footsteps on the hardwood floor. I turned on my television and heard voices for the first time in over a decade, though they sounded garbled and robotic. I called the speaking clock just to hear numbers. I stood on my balcony and listened to the city below, the traffic and conversations, an endless beautiful noise of life. At some point during that week, I made a decision that would change everything. I would not tell Derek about my hearing. Not yet. The thought arrived, fully formed, surprising me with its clarity. For 12 years, people had spoken freely around me, assuming I could not hear. For 12 years, I had been excluded from conversations, treated differently, spoken about rather than spoken to. Now, I had an opportunity. I could be a fly on the wall in my own life. I could learn what people really thought of me, what my son really thought of me. Was it wrong? Perhaps. Was it deceptive? Certainly. But something deep inside me needed to know the truth. The way Brenda looked at me, the way Derek's visits had dwindled, the whispered conversations I had witnessed but never understood. I needed to hear what they said when they thought I could not hear. And so I made a choice. For a few weeks at least, I would pretend nothing had changed. I would continue to read lips and sign. I would let them believe I was still deaf, and I would listen. Derek called 3 weeks after my surgery to schedule his monthly visit. I texted back that Sunday worked fine. My heart was pounding as I typed those simple words. This would be the first time I saw him since regaining my hearing. The first time I would hear his voice in 12 years. They arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Derek, Brenda, Madison, and Tyler, spilling into my small apartment with bags and jackets and the chaos of a family in motion. I greeted them with signs and hugs, careful to maintain my usual behavior. Derek signed back asking how I was feeling. I responded that I was fine, just a little tired lately. He nodded, already distracted, checking his phone. The children immediately disappeared into the guest bedroom, their tablet screens glowing in their hands. Brenda settled onto my couch, crossing her legs and sighing heavily. Derek sat in the armchair across from me, and for the first time in 12 years, I heard his voice. He sounded older than I remembered, deeper, more tired. But it was still my son's voice, the voice that had once called me mommy and asked for bedtime stories. I had to fight back tears, turning away under the pretense of fetching drinks from the kitchen. That was when I heard them. I was standing at my counter pouring lemonade into glasses, my back to the living room. They assumed I could not hear them. Why would they think otherwise? Brenda spoke first. How much longer do we have to do this? Every month, same thing. Derek sighed. I know, but she is my mother. She just sits there like a statue. The kids are bored to death. Let us just stay an hour and leave. I have golf tomorrow anyway. My hands froze on the lemonade pitcher. The words hit me like physical blows, each one landing in my chest. She just sits there like a statue, bored to death. Just an hour. I stood in that kitchen for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, breathing, processing, trying not to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Then I picked up the tray of drinks, arranged my face into a pleasant expression, and returned to my family. The next hour was torture. I sat across from them, watching their mouths move, pretending I could not understand. But now I heard everything. Brenda commenting that my apartment smelled musty. Derek agreeing they should look into air purifiers as a Christmas gift. Tyler whining that he was bored. Madison asking when they could leave. Not if they could leave. When. I signed questions about their lives, and Derek responded with minimal effort. Work was fine. Kids were fine. Brenda was fine. Everything fine, fine, fine. The word had never sounded so empty. When they finally stood to leave, Derek hugged me briefly, his arms barely touching my shoulders. "See you next month, Mom," he said aloud, forgetting to sign. Then he remembered and made a few quick gestures. "Take care, love you." I watched them drive away from my window, my vision blurred with tears I had been holding back for an hour. The following weeks brought more revelations, each one more painful than the last. I began finding excuses to visit Derek's house, offering to drop off homemade cookies or pick up things I had supposedly left behind. Each visit was an opportunity to listen. I heard Brenda complain to her friend on the phone about her deaf mother-in-law, who could not even have a normal conversation. I heard Madison ask Derek why Grandma was so weird, and Derek laugh softly instead of correcting her. I heard Tyler tell his sister that going to Grandma's house was the most boring thing ever, and no one disagreed. But the conversation that broke me happened 3 weeks after my surgery. I had come by to deliver a scarf I had knitted for Madison, letting myself in through the garage door they always left unlocked. I assumed everyone was out. I was wrong. Derek and Brenda were in the kitchen, their voices carrying clearly into the hallway, where I stood frozen. "We should think about a care home for her," Brenda said. Her tone was casual, like she was discussing where to eat dinner. "A nursing home." Derek sounded uncertain. "She is not that old." "She is deaf, Derek. She cannot take care of herself forever. And honestly, these visits are exhausting. The kids hate going there. I hate going there." "I do not know. It feels wrong. Think about it. We would not have to visit every month. The money we spend on her apartment could go to the kids' college fund. There are nice places that specialize in people like her." People like her. The phrase echoed in my head. People like her. As if I were a category, a problem to be solved, not a person who had raised my son alone, who had sacrificed everything for his future. Derek was quiet for a long moment. I held my breath, waiting, praying he would defend me, praying he would say something like, "No, that is my mother. She sacrificed everything for me. I could never do that." Instead, he said, "Let me think about it." Not no, not never. Just let me think about it. I left the scarf on their porch and drove home in a fog. I do not remember the drive. I only remember sitting in my apartment afterward, staring at the wall, listening to the silence that suddenly felt more comfortable than any sound. For 1 week, I did nothing but grieve. I grieved the son I thought I had raised. I grieved the relationship I thought we had. I grieved the fantasy I had constructed over 12 years of silence, the belief that Derek's distance was just busyness, just the normal drift of adult children from their parents. Now I knew the truth. I was not drifting. I was being discarded. The grief came in waves. Some moments I was furious, pacing my apartment, mentally composing speeches I would never give. How dare they? After everything I sacrificed, after the double shifts and the second jobs, and the years I wore second-hand clothes, so Derek could have new books. After I sold my piano, my precious piano, because I could not bear to look at it anymore. After I moved to this city, I did not choose away from my friends and my home just to be near a son who saw me as a burden. Other moments, I was devastated, curled on my bed, sobbing until my chest ached. Had it always been this way? Had Derek always seen me as an obligation rather than a mother? Or had Brenda poisoned him against me over the years, slowly convincing him that I was not worth his time? Did it even matter which was true? I thought about confronting them immediately, marching into their house and revealing that I had heard everything, watching their faces crumble with shock and shame. There would be satisfaction in that, I knew. A moment of power after feeling powerless for so long. But what would it accomplish? They would apologize probably, make excuses, promise to do better. And then what? I would spend the rest of my life wondering if their kindness was genuine or just guilt. I would become even more of a burden. The mother who caught them being cruel and now had to be managed even more carefully. No. If I was going to act, I needed to be strategic. I needed to give them one more chance to show me who they really were. And then I needed to make a decision about my own life. I invited them to dinner at my apartment. I told Derek I wanted to cook his favorite meal from childhood, pot roast with mashed potatoes and gravy. He seemed surprised, but agreed to come. I spent all day preparing not just the food, but myself. I practiced keeping my expression neutral. I rehearsed responses in sign language. I prepared myself to hear whatever they would say. They arrived at 6, the children trailing behind with their usual disinterest. I welcomed them warmly, signing my greetings, playing the role of the deaf mother they expected. The table was set beautifully. The pot roast was perfect, just the way I used to make it when Derek was small. Brenda picked at her food, moving it around her plate. "The food is okay, I guess," she murmured to Derek when she thought I was focused on my own meal. "At least she can still cook, at least." As if my value as a human being could be measured in pot roasts. Madison and Tyler ate quickly, asking to be excused before anyone else had finished. They retreated to their tablets without waiting for an answer. Derek checked his watch throughout the meal, never putting his phone away completely. Brenda made no effort to communicate with me at all, not even the polite nods she used to offer. After dinner, I brought out apple pie. Derek signed that it looked delicious, but only took one bite before pushing the plate away. "We should probably get going," he said aloud to Brenda, forgetting again that he was supposed to be signing. "Kids have school tomorrow." It was 6:45. They had been there less than an hour. I walked them to the door, hugging each grandchild who barely tolerated my embrace. Derek gave me his usual perfunctory hug. "Thanks for dinner, Mom," he signed quickly. "See you next month." Brenda did not even say goodbye. She was already walking to the car. I stood in my doorway, watching them leave. No one looked back. No one waved. They drove away as quickly as they could. That night, I made my decision. I was done being invisible, done being an obligation, done being a burden they tolerated out of guilt. I was 57 years old, I could hear again, and I still had life to live. It was time to take it back. 2 days later, I called Derek. Not a video call, not a text, a real phone call, voice to voice. When he answered, his confusion was audible. "Hello, who is this?" "It is your mother, Derek." Silence. Complete stunned silence. "Mom, you are calling me. How are you?" "I can hear you, Derek. I can hear everything now." I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "I had surgery about a month ago. Cochlear implant. It worked. And I decided not to tell you." "What, why, Mom? This is amazing. Why would you keep this from me?" "Because I wanted to hear the truth. And I did." More silence. I could almost hear his mind racing, trying to calculate what I might have overheard. "I heard you tell Brenda that visiting me was something to just get through. That you only planned to stay an hour because you had golf. I heard your children say I was boring. I heard Brenda suggest putting me in a nursing home because I'm too much of a burden. And I heard you say you would think about it." Derek made a choking sound. "Mom, I can explain." "I do not need explanations, Derek. I need you to listen." I took a deep breath. For 12 years I had been silent. Now I had a voice, and I was going to use it. "I raised you alone after your father died. I worked 2 jobs so you could go to college. I sold my piano, the only thing that ever brought me joy, because I could not bear the reminder of what I lost. I moved to a city. I did not choose to be near you. I spent 12 years isolated and lonely, holding on to the belief that my son loved me. And now I know the truth. Mom, I do love you. Maybe you do. Maybe somewhere under all the distance and the obligations and the influence of a wife who sees me as an inconvenience, you still love me. But love without respect is not enough. Love that only shows up when it is convenient is not enough." I paused, giving him time to respond. He did not. "I am selling my apartment, Derek. I am moving back to Nashville. I have friends there. I have a life there, or at least I used to. And now I can hear again. I can hear music again. I am going to rebuild everything I gave up." "Mom, please, can we talk about this?" "We are talking about it right now. And here is what I need you to understand. You do not need to visit me anymore. You do not need to send money anymore. I release you from whatever obligation you feel toward me. You are free." His voice cracked. "I do not want to be free from you. You are my mother." Then act like it. Not because you feel guilty about what I overheard. Not because you are afraid I will tell people what kind of son you have been. But because you actually want to be in my life. When you figure out which one it is, you know how to reach me. I hung up the phone before he could respond. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. But for the first time in 12 years, I felt powerful. I listed my apartment for sale the following week. The real estate agent was surprised by my urgency, but I did not explain. I simply wanted out of Atlanta as quickly as possible. Every corner of that apartment held memories of waiting. Waiting for visits that were too short, waiting for phone calls that never came, waiting for a son who saw me as a checkbox on his to-do list. The apartment sold in 3 weeks to a young couple expecting their first child. I watched them walk through the rooms imagining their future and felt nothing but relief. This place had never been my home. It had been my holding cell. Nashville welcomed me back like an old friend. I found a small cottage in the same neighborhood where I had lived before, just a few blocks from my old house. The current owners of that house had added a second story and painted it blue, but the magnolia tree in the front yard was still there, the same tree where Harold had proposed 34 years earlier. I stood on the sidewalk and cried, but they were good tears, healing tears. My friends from before were overjoyed to see me. Patricia from my old church group nearly knocked me over with her hug. She could not believe I could hear again, kept testing me by whispering things and laughing when I responded. Word spread quickly through our community, and soon I was receiving casseroles and flowers and invitations to dinner. People I had not seen in 12 years welcomed me back without hesitation. This was what family felt like, I realized. People who were happy to see you simply because you existed. The first time I sat at a piano again, I trembled so hard I could barely lift my hands to the keys. Patricia had an old upright in her living room, slightly out of tune, but functional. She left me alone with it, understanding that this moment was sacred. I pressed one key, middle C. The note rang out, imperfect and beautiful and real. I pressed another, then another. My fingers remembered the patterns, even when my mind forgot. Within minutes, I was playing a simple melody, a lullaby I used to sing to Derek when he was small. And I wept. I wept for everything I had lost and everything I was reclaiming. I wept for the years of silence and the pain of what I had heard when silence ended. I wept for the mother I had been and the woman I was becoming. Over the following weeks, I bought my own piano. Nothing fancy, just a modest digital model that fit in my cottage's small living room. But it was mine, and it made sound, and that was enough. I practiced every day, rebuilding skills that had atrophied over 12 years. My fingers were stiff at first, uncooperative, but gradually, they remembered their purpose. I started teaching again. Just a few students at first. Neighborhood children whose parents heard about the retired music teacher who had miraculously regained her hearing. I did not charge much, sometimes nothing at all. The joy of watching young fingers find their way across the keys was payment enough. Music had returned to my life, and I wanted to share it with everyone. 3 months after I moved back to Nashville, Derek called. I almost did not answer. But something made me pick up the phone, some stubborn maternal instinct that refused to die completely. His voice sounded different, smaller somehow, younger. "Mom, I need to talk to you." "I'm listening." He took a shaky breath. "I have been thinking about everything you said. Every day. I cannot stop thinking about it." I waited. I had waited 12 years. I could wait a little longer. Brenda and I have been having problems. We have been having problems for years, actually. But I did not want to see it. After you left, we had a huge fight. She said some things about you that I cannot repeat. And something in me just snapped. I defended you, Mom. For the first time in years, I actually defended you. What happened? We started counseling, both of us together and separately. And I have been doing a lot of thinking about the man I have become, the son I have become. I am not proud of it. His voice broke. You gave up everything for me. Everything. And I repaid you by treating you like an inconvenience. I let Brenda dictate how we treated you. I let the kids disrespect you. I talked about putting you in a nursing home like you were a problem to be solved. Derek, no, let me finish, please. He was crying now. I could hear the tears in his voice. I was wrong. I was so wrong. And I know I do not deserve your forgiveness. But I want you to know that I am trying to be better. Not because of guilt or because I got caught. Because I finally see what I lost. We talked for 2 hours that night. Really talked for the first time in longer than I could remember. Derek told me about the emptiness in his marriage, the pressure at work, the way he had been running so fast from his life that he forgot to actually live it. I told him about the loneliness of my silent years, the hope I had held on to, the devastation of learning the truth. It was not easy. Real conversations never are. But by the end, something had shifted between us. Not healed, not yet, but opened, like a door that had been locked for years finally creaking aja. Derek and Brenda separated 6 months later. He moved into an apartment closer to his office, sharing custody of Madison and Tyler. The divorce was finalized the following year. I did not celebrate. A failed marriage is never something to celebrate, even when it frees someone from a toxic situation. But I noticed changes in my grandchildren. Without Brenda's influence, they began to see me differently. Madison started asking questions about my life, about their grandfather, about music. Tyler wanted to learn piano, so I taught him over video calls. Slowly, carefully, we built relationships that had never been allowed to grow before. Derek visits me in Nashville now. Real visits, not obligatory check-ins. He stays for whole weekends, helping in my garden, joining me at church, sitting beside me on the piano bench, the way he did when he was 5 years old. Sometimes we do not talk at all. We just play music together, filling the cottage with sounds I never thought I would hear again. I'm 62 years old now. 5 years have passed since that terrible conversation in Derek's kitchen. 5 years since I reclaimed my voice and my life. My hearing has stabilized with regular adjustments to my implant. I still have occasional difficulties in noisy environments, and phone calls can be challenging. But I hear birdsong in the morning. I hear my piano. I hear my son's voice when he calls every week, not every month. Not out of obligation, but because he wants to. Nashville remains my home, though I have traveled more in the past 5 years than in all my previous decades combined. I visited my old students from Jefferson High, now grown with children of their own. I saw concerts and symphonies, sitting in audiences with tears streaming down my face. I went to the beach and listened to waves. I stood in forests and heard wind through leaves. Every sound feels like a gift I will never take for granted. Derek and I have built something new from the wreckage of what we had before. It is not the relationship I imagined having with my son. It is different, marked by history and pain and hard-earned understanding. But it is honest. We say what we mean. We do not pretend. When I tell him I love him, he knows I mean it. When he tells me the same, I believe him. Madison is 17 now, applying to colleges, thinking about studying music education. She wants to be like her grandmother, she says, and those words heal wounds I did not know still ached. Tyler is 15, a decent pianist, though his real passion is basketball. He calls me Grandma Iva and asks for life advice and actually listens to my answers. I learned many lessons from my years of silence and the painful gift of hearing again. I learned that we cannot control how others treat us, but we can control how long we tolerate being treated badly. I learned that hope without boundaries becomes waiting, and waiting without action becomes wasting. I learned that loving someone does not mean accepting their worst behavior. Sometimes love means saying enough. Most importantly, I learned that my worth does not depend on anyone else's assessment of me. For years, I measured myself by how much my son visited, how much attention my grandchildren paid me, how useful I was to a family that saw me as a burden. I was wrong. My worth is inherent. I'm valuable because I exist, because I have lived and loved and survived. Because I can make music and grow tomatoes and teach children to find joy in melody. No one can take that from me. Forgiveness came slowly. Not forgiveness for what they said about me, but forgiveness for myself, for staying too long, for accepting too little, for being afraid to demand what I deserved. I was not weak, I realized. I was hopeful. And hope, while sometimes misguided, is never something to be ashamed of. When I was deaf, I thought I was missing out on the world, the sounds, the conversations, the music. But when I got my hearing back, I realized that sometimes silence protects us from truths we are not ready to face. The truth about my son nearly destroyed me, but it also set me free. Now, every morning, I wake up to birdsong outside my window. I make coffee and sit at my piano playing whatever my fingers remember or my heart invents. I call friends and visit neighbors and teach lessons to children who have their whole musical lives ahead of them. I'm 62 years old and I'm just getting started. If you're watching this and feeling like a burden to your children, like an obligation they tolerate rather than a person they cherish, please hear me. You are not a burden. You are a treasure. Your years of sacrifice, your love, your presence in their lives, all of that has value beyond measure. And if they cannot see it, maybe it is time you start seeing it for yourself. You deserve more than monthly visits squeezed between golf games. You deserve more than hushed conversations about nursing homes. You deserve more than being called boring by grandchildren who never took the time to know you. You deserve love that shows up, not perfect love because that does not exist, but present love, honest love, love that sees you as a person, not a problem. And if that love is not being offered to you freely, remember this: you have the power to offer it to yourself. You have the power to demand better. You have the power to start over even at 57 or 62 or 84. The silence taught me how to survive, but hearing taught me how to live. Before I go, I would love to know your thoughts. Have you ever felt like a burden to your own family? Have you ever discovered a painful truth that set you free? Please share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who is going through the same thing. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to hit that like button. And if you have not already, subscribe to this channel so you will not miss more stories like mine. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose life might change because you press that share button. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here with me today. I wish you all the courage to claim the life you deserve. May you find your voice, your music, and your peace. And may you always remember, you are worth so much more than anyone's opinion of you. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And please keep listening to the sounds around you. You never know what truths they might reveal.